take a look at how to add that to our pipeline. And then we're going to talk about layouts. I mentioned this morning that layouts, it's that thing, it's kind of like a picture frame. So we can put things like a nav bar, we can put things like a footer, anything that we want to appear on all of our views, we can put it into this layouts file, and we only have to put it in our code one time, and it'll be reused on all of our pages. So we're actually going to build one of those as well. So to start, let me put a link to handlebars. So this is kind of the star of this afternoon. That's a link to the documentation I just put into Slack for handlebars, which is a templating engine. Now, what does that mean? My screenshots are a little laggy today. There we go. So what handlebars allows us to do is embed JavaScript variables directly into our HTML documents. And then that JavaScript code will be rendered as HTML when it hits our browser client side. And it's very similar to something like this that we've done. So if you guys want to put this into your DevTools in the console, JavaScript console, so theoretically what we're doing today, it's very similar to this concept where maybe we create a variable, assign something to it, and then we can console log that variable to a string. In this example that I put into Slack, we're using something called template strings. So remember, if we use those backticks for the entire string, and then we can use that $ curly bracket syntax, we can actually insert JavaScript into the curly brackets, and it'll be rendered, it'll be parsed as JavaScript in the code. Now, in this example, we're actually inserting the string mark via the variable name into that string. But remember that anything between those curly brackets is valid JavaScript code. So we can pass in functions, we can do addition or subtraction. It's a valid JavaScript little mini environment within those handlebars. And so that's what we're going to take advantage of today using this handlebars templating engine. And I also just wanted to mention that there's several varieties of these templating engines out there. There's one called Jade, which is super popular. Some of you guys may have heard of this. Sorry, does someone have a question? Sorry, you're on mute, buddy.
It's not called Jade anymore.
Really? What's it called now?
Yeah, it's called Pug.
Seriously?
Seriously.
I checked it out last night. At least on NPM, it's still called Jade. I have to check that out. Did someone else, did the source code change or something?
Copyright. Something like that.
Silly copyrights. Yeah, Colin talked about that yesterday, right? Was it, or he was talking about that scenario that happened not too long ago, right. The copyright with the NPM module. Yeah, and they pulled it, which was pretty awesome, actually. I think that's because those dependencies are pretty important. So I wanted to point out two other ones. A really popular one is Jade. I guess it's now called Pug. But that templating engine is really popular with the JavaScript stack, but it's a little more complex because it deals with white space. So your tabs need to be really important. It's less code that you write, and it makes up for that by making sure that like your indentation is very proper and you use the correct spacing in tabs. So it's a little tricky. It takes a little bit of practice. The other one I wanted to mention is something called embedded JavaScript. So embedded JavaScript is really popular, and it's very, very similar. It looks very similar to what we're going to be using when we get to Ruby and Rails, called embedded Ruby. So in the past, when we've taught Ruby and Rails first, we usually use embedded JavaScript just because it looks very, very similar. However, the tool we're going to use today, called Handlebars, I think is a lot more fun, and it has some really cool features. So we're going to go with Handlebars today. It's a good, good tool to know. All right, so again, like this morning, I'm going to walk through 4 steps to get Handlebars into our Hello Express application, and then we'll take some time and let you guys install it, and then we're actually going to build some views and templates. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll walk through these couple of steps. So if you still have your Hello Express app up in Atom, I still have my server running. Remember that it's nodemon. So fortunately, I won't have to restart my server when I add some new code. But right now, everything is pretty much like I left it before lunch. So I have my app, it's up and running here. Cool, let me paste the screenshot into Slack and I'll get moving. Now the first thing is you'll probably notice, the first thing that I want to do is actually use npm install to go out to the npm manager and grab this module, this library. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So I have my server running in one window, and I created a tab. Like we mentioned this morning, sometimes it's a really good workflow to have your server running in one tab that I don't even have to touch or worry about. And then in this other tab, this is a perfect use case for when I'm going to, enter in some code on the command line. And so I don't want to stop my server and such. So this makes it a lot more efficient. So what we're going to do is we're going to install handlebars. And actually, there's two different packages. The one that we're going to use is HBS. So it's kind of an abbreviation for handlebars. So we want to make sure that we're using this version, this HBS. Cool. So we installed that module. The next thing that I'm going to want to do, and this is pretty much boilerplate, the pattern, the steps that you're going to have to do anytime you install a new module, I need to require it here in my index.js. So I have it locally in my node modules. I also have it in my package.json because I use that -- save. So npm was very kind and automatically just put it in my package.json for me. But the last thing I need to do is actually tell my app that I want to use it. So I'm going to go in here around line 3, right below my express requires in my var app. And I'm going to require handlebars. What you name the variable, technically you can name it whatever, but the convention and the best practice is, to name the variable the module that you're installing. Just makes your life a little bit easier. So I'm going to use this require. And while we're here, a quick review. Would someone be kind enough to come on mic and, in their own words, describe what require is, what it does for us in our Express apps?
The require essentially allows us to access the code within another module.
Yeah, was that Tom? I think it was Tom. If it was Tom, thank you, Tom. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we use npm install, and we have that library in our node modules folder. However, that doesn't complete the transaction. We still need to require it within our remember index.js is kind of like the brain center of our app. It's kind of the central location. So we still need to pull it in and tell our app that we want to require it. Cool, so we installed it, we required it in our index.js. The next thing we need to do is we need to tell our Express app that we want to use that engine to render our views. Now remember, we could use like a Jade/Pug engine. We could use an embedded JavaScript engine if you wanted, but we need to be very specific. So in this case, we want to use handlebars specifically. The way we're going to do that is we're going to use another method that Express gives us called .set. So anytime we need to do some sort of configuration or tell our Express app very specifically that we want to use a piece of software or a particular library, we can set that with the .set method. So specifically, I want to set the view engine for Express. So we're telling Express what we're setting, and then comma, and then the engine that I want to use. In this case, I'm using handlebars, and this HBS in quotes is referring to the variable HBS. So we require the library here, assign it to a variable called HBS, and then we actually set up the configuration here with the view engine. The last thing I want to do while I'm here is I want to go ahead and set my app. So right now we don't have any file structure for maybe extra views, for extra style sheets or JavaScript files. We haven't really set that up yet. And we're going to get to that a little bit later, the CSS and the JavaScript. But right now, let's set up a directory for our views. We need to tell Express where to look to render these views. And so to do that, we're going to do another app.set, and this time we're going to set the views location. And here in ticks, so I'm going to create a views folder in this parent kind of root directory, and we're going to call it views, nothing too crazy. And that can be like single ticks or double quotes, it doesn't really matter, but cool. So we just told Express how we want to render our views, and we also told it where we're going to store our views. So that's step 3. Finally, the last step, let's actually create a views folder and create 2 views to start with. And so I'm going to go to the terminal. I'm going to create a directory called views. You guys can see my terminal window here. And it's just in the parent directory, kind of the root. So I'll create a views directory, and then let's create a layout. And then I'm also going to create a greeting. So just to kick the tires, we're going to play around with our greeting route first. So as you probably noticed, the convention is to name, if I have a route called greeting, I want to name my appropriate view greeting as well. You don't have to do that, but it is kind of the convention because it just makes our lives a little bit easier when things are named the same. The other thing you probably noticed is that the file extension for handlebars is .hbs. And that's really important because our view engine, Express knows when it hits this file, it knows that there's handlebars code within this file. And Express needs to render all of that JavaScript information. It needs to render it into HTML server side before it sends it to the client. And we're going to take a look at that process in the next few steps. But again, to recap, we installed handlebars, we required it, we set our view engine in our views folder, and then we created the folder and created 2 views. So those are the 4 steps. So quick timeout, and I want you guys to recreate that. I'm going to stop my screen share. And go ahead and get your app up to speed, just like I did. So follow those 4 steps above. And then give me a thumbs up in Slack when you've got that up and running. Now we haven't added any HTML or handlebars code to those files, so we're going to do that next. So it's not like you should see a view change or anything right now. We'll add that code in the next step. We just want to kind of get that app prepped for our next few steps.
Hey, Mark. Got a question while we're waiting.
Sure.
I think it's a little confusing that when we type app.set and view engine and then HBS, that HBS is in quotes since it's a variable. Like in general programming in JavaScript, we would put a variable without quotes to reference like what is inside that variable, right?
Right.
So is there an explanation to that, or is it just something we just have to, memorize the syntax so we repeat that,
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that's kind of the convention. We're going to see, I do understand the question. That's a really good point. Like, why are we passing that in as a string and not a variable? It's kind of just the way Express takes in these arguments. We're going to see more of this, for example, when we get into Mongo next week. And a lot of the Mongo declarations, Mongo is going to be our database. But when we pass in Mongo information, that's going to be in quotes as well. Yeah, I would just say that's just the Express convention. I'd have to look in the source, in the documentation, to see if there's some precise reason the way that the Express engine works. But it's just how it's set up, just a pattern. Matt's suggesting it makes sense to use a string because identifying an object is tricky. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, so we have 9 thumbs up, so we'll wait just a few more seconds, and then we'll actually see how to take advantage of this handlebar functionality in our views. Alrighty, I'm going to move forward. So we just went through the steps to incorporate handlebars, i.e. any other type of view engine into our app, or excuse me, any kind of templating library that we want our view engine to take advantage of. So going forward, if you want to use some sort of external view engine, you're going to need to go through those steps of npm installing it, requiring it, and setting your view engine to that particular module. So you'll go through those steps in the future. Let's take a look at what Handlebars does and how we actually incorporate that into our views. So step 1 here that I put into Slack, we didn't quite get to query parameters before lunch. If you guys have some time tonight just to read those sections, but it shouldn't be too crazy here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some code to our greeting path, our greeting route in our index.js. So let me share my screen and I'll show you where we want to put some code. So now that we have a view engine, we're going to be able to create some views. Instead of just sending goofy strings back to the browser, we're going to be sending full-fledged HTML templates. So we're going to put some magic inside our greeting route right here. That's just the one we're going to use as an example. So let me get rid of the hey WDI remote. The first thing I'm going to do, and all this is in that screenshot, I'm just going to console log. We're going to take a look at this query property on our request object. I'm just going to console log it just for sanity's sake. I really want to make sure that stuff's hitting server side in my server logs. And so remember, when we put a console log in our server side code, that it's not going to render in the browser in our JavaScript console. We're going to be able to see that in our node server logs in our terminal window. I'm just going to do a sanity check on that object. But then to actually set up our view, again, we're going to use that res.render this time. So we're not just sending a string, we're going to render something pretty cool. So the first argument that render takes is the actual name of the view that we want to render. So in this case, I'm going to render the view called greeting. So that's the name of the file. Now, quick question, if you want to come off mic or if you want to put it into Slack, why don't I have to put the entire path of my greeting file as an argument here to res.render? Why am I able just to put the word greeting in here and Express is going to know what I'm talking about? And again, this reads, in the response, I want to render this greeting view, the greeting.hbs that we created in the last step. Cool.
Is it because of slacking it out?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm sure you're on the right track there too, Aaron. So it's already set in the app.set. So that saves us some typing, right? This Express is very smart. We configured it in a very thoughtful way. So Express knows that whatever we're rendering, it knows to look into the views folder because that's where it's going to be. So when we hit the greeting route, we're going to be rendering greeting. We still haven't added any, HTML or handlebars yet. We'll get to that in a minute. The other argument that this takes, which is really crucial, it takes the template, the view that we want to render, and then it also takes any sort of data that we want to send back to the client, to the front end. Specifically, if there's any data that we want handlebars to bake into that view before it gets sent back to the client, this is where we can set this up. Now next week, and even tomorrow, we'll talk about actually creating new things via a form. So we'll get a little bit deeper tomorrow. But right inside here, this data, this is where we're going to be passing in data that we grab from our database, more complex types of data gathering. Then we're going to pipe it right in here to this command so we can send it back to the client. And that's kind of where we're heading with all this. But for this example, I'm going to set a data property. This is going to be attached to my response object. And I'm going to assign that to the query request. And we'll see what this means right here. For right now, my data is going to have a value of the request.query.saying. So what does that mean? Well, let's walk through where we're getting that information. Let me go back to my app here. And so I know that I need to hit the greeting route. Greeting. Make that greeting. So when I did greeting, it actually hit this food route because I misspelled it. So remember that :food is kind of like just a wild card. So right now we have 3 routes. We have a root route, we have a greeting route, which specifically must be the word greeting, and then pretty much anything else is going to hit this route. So when I just misspelled greeting, it hit this route instead. Okay, so I got the route correct. I'm hitting greeting. Let me check my server. It looks like, well, that console logged the wrong one. Let's put in a query parameter. That's kind of where we were heading with this. So a query parameter looks like so. I'm going to make the query parameter saying, and we're going to make that equal the statement hi, H-I-I, exclamation point. So now when I hit enter, still nothing's happening in the view because we haven't built that yet. But let's check the console. Now I can see in the console that I'm getting this key of saying with the value of hi. This is actually a query parameter because here in the URL, a query parameter starts with this question mark. It's very similar to what we did with the Google search earlier. So we did like a question mark and then Q equals Rihanna or Q equals best restaurants or something. In this example, I'm going to hit my greeting route and I'm also sending some more information. I'm sending a query. So this is if I'm searching, like saying could be my query, and the value of what I'm saying is the word hi. So it's a little contrived, if you'll just bear with me, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to grab this information that we are receiving on our server, and we're going to pipe this back into a view and see it render in the browser. So that's where we're going with this right now. Right now we're just console logging the request.query. And the request.query is specifically this saying, because that's what I'm capturing here. And it's because that matches what I put in this query parameter.
Is the saying something that you're setting there by saying data request.query.saying? Because that's not something that's already standard within the request object. It's
right. Yeah, I'm actually creating this. So the request query, I can set properties on that. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm looking for a property called saying. And up here in the URL, when I send this is actually setting a query. The key is saying, and the value is high. Let's change it up a bit. Let's put color equals red. So again, this is a query parameter. I know it's a little goofy, but the query is color and the value is going to be red. So right here, let me change this. Actually, we haven't gotten that far yet. Just let me send this back to the server and we'll take a look at it. So when I hit enter, again, we haven't done any view logic yet. But when I go down here to the server, see now these are query parameters. Now I have one of color with the value of red. It's pretty straightforward as far as like Express is concerned. You could put like favorite artist, and then let's
you're setting it by typing it in. It's not setting it by doing the where did you have it in Node? Yeah, so you're not setting the data to saying there. You're setting it to saying when you're setting it as a parameter when you're typing it into the URL.
Yeah, correct. That's a really important distinction. So right here, when I hit enter in my URL, all I'm doing is just sending this query to the server. No big deal.
Okay.
Now, but kind of on your same point, now in the next step, my request query object, now it doesn't have a saying property, right? What is my property now? What would I actually have to look for here? If I was going to send this back to the server, or excuse me, send this back to the client. Is my property saying now, or is it something else?
It had to be favorite artist.
Yeah, exactly. So I would just need to make sure that that exists, because right now I don't have a saying property. This is my request.query object. And right now the only thing I have is this favorite artist. So yeah, you just need to make sure that that's consistent, because this would blow up because there isn't a saying property on my query object. I changed it to favorite artist.
And then why are you setting its key as data there?
That's just a convention. That could actually be anything you want. This data is really going to come into play here momentarily, because we're going to put that data, it's kind of a variable, if you will. Actually, it's a property here in this the response object. This could technically be anything you wanted, but the convention is data, because this is information that we're going to send back to the server, and we're going to plug this data into our view with handlebars here in a few steps.
Okay.
So data is just a convention. It's the best practice to use that as data, because that's usually we're going to be getting data from a database that we're going to bake into a view. You know, if I hit my database, show me all of my, news feeds from Facebook. Then underneath the hood, server side, there's probably like a data variable that's grabbing all of my news feeds, and then it's going to bake that into a view so I can scroll through them and such.
Okay.
Yeah. This is really dense stuff, by the way. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. I think once you just get in here and tinker with it, you can see what works and what doesn't. Yeah, there's definitely some moving parts for sure. Luckily, Express, compared to other frameworks, is pretty lightweight. So I think, and plus, given your knowledge of JavaScript from Unit 1, I think once you get in here and think about that object-oriented programming and properties and such, that it'll start to click eventually. So let me change that back. Actually, we're fine with saying right now. I just need to make sure that for our example that this needs to be saying. So I'll just change it back to that for now. Cool. So that was the first step. And again, just to recap, when we use this res.render method, the first thing we pass in is the name of the view that we're going to send to the client. The second argument that we pass in is whatever data that we want to send back. Now, we don't even have to send data. Maybe we're sending like a static page. You don't have to send anything data-wise back. Maybe we have some hard-coded, welcome to WDI or something in this view. But if you do want to send data, that's where you put it, is right after the view that you're going to plug it into. All right, cool. So hang with me for just like 2 more steps, and then you guys will plug this into your app. Just want to show you how this whole thing works. The second thing that I want to do, let's actually go into the view, and let's add some handlebars logic and see how this thing gets baked up. Maybe that'll render in just a second. My little screenshot engine's a little slow today. So for this step, I'm going to go into my views layouts file, and I want to add some code to that picture frame. And this picture frame is where I'm going to stick every individual route. If I have a greeting route, I'll send the greeting view inside this picture frame. If I have a favorite artist route with the favorite artist view, I'll plug that into this picture frame. So let's see what that looks like. I'm just going to grab that code from the README, and I'm going to go into layout, and I'll paste that in. So let me explain what's going on here. It's pretty much just a basic, if you had HTML tab in Atom, it's a pretty basic scaffolded HTML page. Here on the head, I put the title in here, and I also put a link to an external style sheet. We're going to get to that kind of at the end of the lesson. It's not mission critical right now, but I'm going to add the style sheet here in the head. Now here's where the really cool magic happens. So again, think of this as a picture frame. And within this picture frame, just for an example, I want to pretend this is just a placeholder. Let's pretend that I want to put a nav bar on every page in my app. So this is where I'm going to put the nav, right? It's right inside the body, kind of at the top of the page. So just for funsies, I put this nav bar placeholder. And then right down here at the bottom of the body, I put down this footer placeholder, just to kind of demonstrate that. Now right here in the middle is where the magic happens. So this is where handlebars is going to plug in each individual view that corresponds to whatever route we're hitting. And this has to be pretty exact. This is from their documentation. So we need these 3 handlebars in this example. And that's just because in the layouts, considering that we're using the keyword body, it's just how handlebars has it set up. We just need to make sure that this HTML doesn't accidentally think this is like a body tag. So for some reason, the way that handlebars is built, we just want to be extra safe and put 3 handlebars on each side. And then this body refers to the body of our page. This body is where each individual template is going to get piped in. So for example, we're going to build some stuff in this greeting view here in a second. And when I go to /greeting, whatever's in this greetings file is going to be pumped in right here. So it's as if we just copied that greeting code and put it right here in the middle of our layouts file. It's a super flexible and model view controller-y way to set up your code. Because for example, if I want a nav bar on every page, it's going to be really inefficient if I put this nav bar, like literally create that code on every single view, or create this footer on every single view. I can do one-stop shopping right here, make a little picture frame, and then plug in the view that corresponds to the route. So that sets up the layout. Now let's put a little bit of code into this greeting view, and we'll refresh and see this thing at work. So now that I did all that heavy lifting on that layouts page, I don't have to do another like HTML. I don't need to rescaffold. For example, I don't need to build another HTML scaffolding within this file because the layout already has that for me. All that I need to worry about in my other view files is just whatever I want to plug into the body, just the body HTML code. So it's really pretty handy. And for this example, this is really all I want. It's pretty bare bones. When I go to the greeting route, I want to see an H1 of here is our greeting route response. And then here, what do you guys think this data variable or this data keyword, what does this respond to? Let me move this down here. So if you look at the route for greeting, which is going to load up this greeting view. What do you guys think that this data is represented or is representing here between these handlebars? You can come off mic or put it into Slack.
So the query string that we put in your parameters of saying.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so this data right here is referencing this data right here in the route, because we're telling Express, hey, grab this view called greeting and plug this data inside it. Make it available to that view. And the way that we grab that data or insert it into that view is between handlebars right here. So if we renamed this, send, well, it's probably camel case, right? Send data to view or something. Let's just say that we renamed it. That's no big deal. I just need to make sure that I'm grabbing that there in my template as well. So that needs to be apples to apples. That needs to be the same. Let me undo that. But it is. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna ask. So in the layout, you had 3 curly brackets on each side, and right there you have 2 on each side. So what is the difference? Like why?
Yeah, like I said, that's just a convention of the handlebars library, and that's directly from their documentation. Handlebars only requires 2 handlebars. Just everything requires 2 handlebars, except because body, you're putting body in the body. Just so handlebars doesn't get confused, the documentation requests that you put 3 handlebars on each side, just to be like extra certain that handlebars isn't going to like accidentally, render this as like, an actual body tag. It's a little tricky because you're using the keyword body within like literal HTML body tags. So that's just from the documentation.
I see.
That's the only place that you need 3 handlebars.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a little confusing. Other than that, it's 2 handlebars all day, every day. All right, so the piece de resistance, I'm going to go back to my greeting query saying equals hi, and let's see if this view will render. So drum roll, and there we go. So this is coming from the layouts file. We have our nav, kind of dummy placeholder. You guys can take that out if you want. It's a little annoying. Here's the footer. So again, that's coming from my picture frame. That's coming from my layout. And then all of this stuff in here is coming from my actual greeting view. So here's my H1, here's our greeting route response, and then there's my data. And so remember, in this contrived example, the data is actually just the word hi with the question mark. And that's where we're getting it, was console logged here to the server. But here's the really magical part, and this is the reason this is considered server-side rendering. And let me ask the class this, if you want to put this into Slack. Do you think when we inspect this element, are we going to see handlebars in our HTML document? When we inspect the element here in the browser, are we going to see handlebars, or are we going to see valid HTML code?
You should see valid HTML code, right?
Absolutely. And that's the beauty of handlebars. So all of this stuff is compiled. Node does this magic for us. That's what the view engine is doing. So before it sends this HTML to the client, it's going to convert all of those handlebars to the corresponding HTML code. So if we go into the inspect element, oops, sorry about that. Here's where the handlebars were, where we had the handlebars with the data. And as far as the browser is concerned, it has no idea if that was handlebars or JavaScript or Jade or Pug or Dalmatian, whatever. All that it knows is that it's receiving a valid HTML file and it renders it appropriately. So when we talk about server-side rendering, what we mean is that all of that HTML, all of that JavaScript gets baked into that HTML file at the server before it gets sent to your browser. So the browser has no idea where that's coming from. It doesn't really care. All it cares is that it's getting a valid HTML document to render. So that's kind of the beauty of server-side rendering. Now, when we get to the meme stack with Angular, Angular does everything actually in the browser. It does everything on the front end. But for unit 2, everything that we're doing is going to be server-side rendering. So it's just something to be mindful of, and hopefully, it'll start to click the difference between the server side and the client side type of muscle. All right, that was a lot to go through. Let me stop my screen share. And now let's take some time and let you guys walk through those 4 steps and get this really sexy looking greeting view rendering in your app. So what I want you guys to do is just walk through the 4 steps that I just walked through and add this functionality to your application. And I'm here if you need any help. But let's see if we can get that wired up and running, and then we'll move forward and add some cooler stuff to our views.
Hey, Mark, do people, do they build their web pages with these frameworks, or is it just used for backend stuff?
Sorry, could you elaborate on the question?
No, I guess I'm just thinking about building our apps before and working with CSS and HTML and all this. It's like we don't even have an HTML file here. We're just building everything, and it's much cooler and it's much more dynamic. So can you just like forget about? Actually, obviously you can't forget about HTML. You have to know what's going on, but
this is a little misleading. What you can do, you don't have to do this, but technically you would probably want to name this file. I'm going to rename these just for example purposes. I didn't put this in there just to demonstrate that you don't need it, but technically what these files are doing, it's greeting.html.hbs. Now what that means is when our handlebars view engine reads this file, it's saying, hey, there's handlebars information within this file. It reads from right to left. So it sees that HBS extension, recognizes that there's some JavaScript within handlebars that it needs to account for, and it's going to convert that into HTML. So that's kind of how these extensions work. Sometimes you'll have like 3 or 4 extensions on a file. I think that's a little overkill. But this is technically what the view engine is doing. Now we don't need that HTML because just inherently Express is sending, if you send a view to the front end, it's going to be HTML. That's really all that it can be. So it's a little overkill to put HTML.hbs, but you're certainly welcome to do so. But the view engine just knows that it's rendering an HTML document to send back to the client. So we don't have to put that if we don't want to. But to your earlier question, like, do people use these types of templating engines? Absolutely they do, particularly the one I mentioned earlier, Jade/Pug now. That's arguably one of the most popular ones. And it's a little more intermediate because it depends more on like white space. If you look at the documentation, there's actually much, much less code than you see here. And the way it gets away with less code is that it relies more on white space and spacing, and do you have like the correct indentation? It relies on that stuff to account for that omission of extra code. For example, you don't have to close your tags. Actually, while you guys are working, let me pull up an example and paste it into Slack. Particularly in Rails, there's a version, a templating engine called Haml, H-A-M-L, which is super popular, and it's the same principle. You can write, insert Ruby code into your HTML, and it gets rendered as HTML before it gets sent to the client. But yeah, people are very opinionated about these engines because they most people have a favorite, and they're pretty hardcore, like one or the other. So let me grab an example. Yeah, so I do see where they've updated it to Pug. That's really interesting. I'll just paste this into Slack. Pretty cool.
So just to sort of clarify a little bit more, so render is basically sort of like a send, but it's specific to posting the HTML / JavaScript, whatever it happens to be, to the DOM. It's sort of like, it's not specifically like, oh, send this response. It's specific to uploading it and then having it show up on the screen. Like, what's the difference between that?
Sure. Well, consider that both send and .render, they're both properties that we can attach to the response object, right? Because it's
right.
res.send or res.render. Now, res.send is a little more generic. So all that it can do is send really basic pieces of information like strings. I think tomorrow morning, Colin's going to do a talk on JSON, which some of you have probably played around with. So I think there's even like a res.json. So let's say that I wanted to send JSON data across the wire. I could use like the .json property on that, or .json method rather. So send just sends really basic strings and such. .render is a little bit more full-featured. So .render assumes and requires that you plug in a view and that you optionally send in like some data that you want to bake into that view.
Okay.
And all of that stuff happens, again, server side. So it's going to grab the greeting information. It's going to wrap it in like that layout that we talked about.
Right.
If we do have any variables, if we do have any handlebars, it's going to go ahead and convert that and compile it on the server before it sends it to the browser. And we just saw in the browser that there are no handlebars, right? All the browser is what was compiled by Node.
Right. The other question I had too was because you're doing greeting in your render as the first argument, it's assuming everything else above it. Is that right? So like layout, because greeting is represented inside of layout, or like how does it recognize that layout needs to be there as well?
Yeah, so that's just a convention. So since that layout exists in the views folder, you need to name that file layout. And so when the view engine sees that layout file, it knows what to do with that.
Okay, so all right, that makes more sense. So I was like, how is layout showing up here? Because we haven't called it.
Yeah, layout's a convention. So that definitely needs to be called layout. Now, eventually, tomorrow, let's say that in our views folder, let's say that we create a folder for like to-dos. And let's say that we can create a folder for like users or some other resources. We'll see tomorrow that that layout file still needs to be within the views, kind of that parent folder. Because we'll create a folder with all the to-do views or all the user views or all the movie views. Eventually, our apps will get so complex that we'll be creating more directories, to try to like dry up and compartmentalize our code. But that layout file does need to be in that like main views folder.
Right.
Yeah. A little bit of magic going on, huh?
Yeah. Well, it seems like because there's so many things. Well, I mean, I guess you could layer so many things going on with Express and other things like HBS and stuff like that. It's interesting to see how certain things like, okay, all I'm doing is calling greeting, but yet layouts is assumed to be called as well.
Yeah.
So
it's going to be the same thing like when we get to Ruby and Rails. We're going to create a layout file, and it's just assumed that every view is going to be like plugged in there.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is full stack, man. This is good stuff.
Yeah, this is good.
Now it's getting real. Keep it 100. Yeah, this is the good stuff. So imagine, we'll plug in a database next week. So we're going to be hitting our database, grabbing all that data, plugging it into a view, sending it to the, to the client. It's going to be good stuff.
Cool.
And for lab time, I wrote up some, lab pointers. I just want you guys to pretty much recreate, what we've done today. A lot of this is muscle memory. A lot of it is, just patterns. You're going to be repeating the same types of processes to set up your app initially. So it's just getting practice and repetition with this stuff. So, so I have 7 thumbs ups. So we'll wait just another minute or two. I see 5 thumbs down. So does someone want to, or is that 6? My browser sucks. I mean, my monitor. Does anyone want to share their screen? Maybe we can try to troubleshoot some stuff.
I can. I'm not exactly sure what is this supposed. I mean, I added what you had listed in the little markdown up here, but
Sure.
I don't know exactly what's supposed to be happening exactly. I don't notice too much of a difference.
Let me give you a. I'm going to put a screenshot of my browser.
Maybe I'm being crazy. I don't know.
No, this is. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces. So this, I mean, full
Just basically added this to it.
Yeah, that looks good. So that's a good start. Let's check your views. So let's check your layout.hbs.
Yeah, nothing's in there. Was I supposed to make a scaffolding with like HTML?
Yeah, you can scaffold it, or if you want to grab the code from the README, I'll put it into Slack as well.
Maybe that's what I was missing. I did like the other stuff, and then I was like, I don't know what it's supposed to be doing now.
Yeah. Yeah, because I just put the screenshot into Slack. Let me grab here. I'm going to put in the layout.hbs information here.
Okay, that's where I was a little bit
Yeah.
confused.
Yeah.
I was like, where's this magic? I knew I was watching you do all this stuff, but I just didn't understand. Like, since it wasn't listed in that markdown, I didn't want to go ahead and start adding different stuff.
Yeah. No, so it looks like everything is rendering correctly in the browser. It's just that you have no HTML code like in your views. So it's just like
That's
rendering.
right.
Yeah.
I just didn't see it in that like original markdown, so I didn't know if I was supposed to
Yeah.
stop
So-
there.
Yeah, so that code I just slacked out, put that into your layout.hbs, and then let me put the code for the greeting.hbs. Yeah, and then here's the URL. If you're following along, this is the URL we were hitting. Yep. Cool. So we got 12 thumbs up. So that's a good sign.
So I think maybe this question would be getting ahead of myself, but if we were to set up like an event handler on like a button that basically brought us to what would be like another page within the website. So like I have my about me or something like that, and then I wanted to change over to my projects and keep my navigation and everything. So I would have essentially different view files that would basically be plugged into that. Now, do I have to, as parameters, pass some sort of text, or is just that text going to trigger whatever happens to be in that specific views file?
The only thing that, if I'm understanding you correctly, let me put this into Slack. So for example, if you want to create a contact page, all you need to do for the route is /contact.
Okay, so it doesn't need a parameter for that.
No. The only reason I was doing that, again, we were going to cover that before lunch, but it's not like mission critical. We were just doing that to simulate getting some data that we could send back to the browser. In this next step, we're going to get rid of the query parameters and actually create a variable with an array of our favorite foods, which will like kind of simulate if we actually grab data from a server. So yeah, don't let the query params, get, I wouldn't think too much on that. It was just a demonstration. And if you want to read that section from the lesson that we didn't quite get to, maybe that'll be a little bit more clear, but
Okay.
yeah. No, /contact is perfect, or /about me. That's all you need.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you try it out, I mean, if you reload this page with just /greeting without the saying equals hi, the page still renders, right? But what's missing now?
The data.
Yeah, just that hi, just our data. But everything else renders, everything else is valid. It still hits the layout because we can see like our nav section and our footer section. It still renders that here is our greeting route response because that's valid HTML. The only thing it doesn't render is that data variable between the handlebars.
Right.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Okay. So, in is that why when we look at certain websites, because like on my current website, when you go to like projects, it shows, you know, .com/, and then it's got like about me.html. But typically when you go to like a professional website, it doesn't have that .html. It's probably because it's doing this sort of rendering.
Actually, if you go to a site that doesn't have HTML, like anything visually that you see in the browser, like that's HTML, whether you put .html or you don't.
Right.
Yeah, I would maybe go to a site that doesn't have .html and put .html at the end of it, and it should still render fine. Some websites, it's just like extra cruft that you don't need. I mean, the browser knows that this is an HTML page.
Right.
Maybe some people coded it that way, but it's not really necessary.
Okay.
All right, cool. Let's move forward. I think we're on a good track to get you guys to lab time. On a good pace, rather. So let's take this one step further. Let's actually hard code some data in that route and kind of simulate if we're grabbing data from a server, from a database or some other location. Let's kind of kick the tires and see what that feels like. So let me share my screen again. I'll walk through a few steps and then you guys will set this up for yourselves. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use a favorite foods route. So I'm going to create a brand new route. And for this, I'm going to create a brand new view that corresponds with that route. I'm going to name this view foods. So the first thing I'm going to do is create this view called foods. So I'll create that, and I see that I have that here in my views. So go ahead and open that up. I'm going to put some stuff in there here in a second. So I created my view. Now let me create the route that will grab this view at the appropriate time. Let's add a route in here. I'll just put it down here below the app.getGreeting. So for this one, I'm going to create a route of, I'm going to call this favorite foods. And then remember that we need to do this function, kind of the callback function, which takes request and response. Those are essential. Those must be included. So this is just a pattern that you're going to follow each time you create a route. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab this from the lesson README. I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called favorite foods. And let's pretend that that variable, let's just pretend underneath the hood that that's like hitting a database and grabbing like my favorite foods from my database. So I have this variable favorite foods. I'm going to make that an array of a couple of foods: shrimp, mustard greens, garlic pasta, and pesto. Man, that is a crazy Blue Apron recipe right there. And so let me build the response.render. So for this response.render, what view do I want to render? What should the first argument be? You can put that into Slack if you want to help me out here. So when I go to /favorite-foods, close, it's not favorite foods. What's the view that I actually created? Foods, yeah. I could have made this favorite foods. But just to demonstrate that this could be anything, you know, the name of the view could be anything you wanted. I just didn't want to deal with like that favorite_foods in the file name because that could be a little confusing. And then what's the second argument? If I'm going to call the .render method on my response, what's the second argument that I need to pass in? It's optional. In this case, what do I want to add right here? So I've got the template comma. And what do I want to pass in next? So what did we do up here in our greeting? What did we pass in this object right here? You can put it into Slack. Here, I'll get it started. So we're actually going to pass in some data again. So what data do I want to pass in this time and plug into my foods? Some query. Not this time. We're not going to deal with the query for this route. We could if we wanted, but for this one, we're doing it in a little bit of a nicer fashion.
We're gonna do like a function that loops through and returns.
That's close. Let's take that a step back. So even before we talk about looping and such, at a very baseline, what's the data that I want to plug into this view? What do I want to pass in?
The favorite foods, right?
Yeah.
The shrimp, greens, garlic, pasta.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so in this case, the data, you can think of that as a key. The value is going to be favorite foods. So we hard-coded this array of favorite foods, just as an example. But for this route, we're going to loop over this favorite foods, and we're going to do the looping. We don't have to do it in our route. We want to keep our routes as we'll get to this in Rails, elaborate on it, but we want to keep the logic in here as skinny as possible. And what I mean by that is, if there's any way that we can put logic and put code in other files, we want to do that. So luckily with handlebars, we're actually going to loop over this array in our view, which is going to be really handy. And handlebars has a really cool way of doing that. So this is perfect. You are correct. Favorite foods is what we want to send to our view. So our route looks good. So let's go to the foods and let's add some code in here. So I'm going to put an H1. Let me put like Mark's favorite foods. And so right now, if I refresh my browser, this should render no problem, right? We should have something to view. And let me test that out just for grins. I'm going to go to favorite foods. And there we go. So I still have the layout information. Remember, that's going to be on every page, which is really handy. And so right now I am grabbing that foods view, that foods template that I just created. It's right here. But I haven't added in the data yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So how could I pass in my array of foods here in my view? What would that code look like? You can put it into Slack, or if you want to come on mic and help me out. What do I need to put here in the view to make that data render? Yeah, Rachel's got it. Yeah, exactly. So we need to call this data. And why are we passing in data into the handlebars in our view? Let me move this down here so we can see our index as well. Here's my route. So why am I calling this data right here? What's the connection? Could I call this favorite foods? Would it work? Why does it have to be called data?
It's just what you have it stored under?
Yeah, absolutely. Right on. It has to be called data because that's the name of that's what I called the key, the property in this object. Again, I could call this like Mark Foods and change this to Mark Foods if I wanted. But the convention to keep things simple is to call it data. You can name it, if you want to change it, but it's a lot simpler if we have a ton of routes in here. It's going to be a little cleaner if every time I see that word data, I instinctively know this is something I'm sending via a response to a view, which is going to be sent back to the client. So we want to consistently call that data. That's the convention. All right, cool. So we have our data. Let's see if this works when I refresh. And voila. So we have our array rendering. So it's rendering as just one long string, right? So handlebars actually converted that array into a string. So it's as if we passed in that favorite foods array. It's as if we did like a, like if we pass it into toString. I'll put this into Slack. It's almost as if we did that. So handlebars just converted it to a string. So we're going to take a break and let you guys get up to speed. And then in the next step, we're actually going to loop over that and make it, you know, look a little bit more like a list. But let's pause right there. So I just walked through 3 steps. So go ahead and implement those steps into your application. And again, we just want to grab that hard-coded array and get that rendered to our page. And again, if you're watching at home, if I inspect the element, notice that there aren't any handlebars in here. It's literally just how the handlebars parsed or compiled that JavaScript code, which was a variable, and then passed it in right here. So the browser has no idea if that was handlebars or that thing called pug or embedded JavaScript. It has no idea. I'll stop my screen share. And then let's take a few minutes and get up to speed. And then go ahead and give me a thumbs up when you get that working. And while you guys are working, a quick quick announcement and such. Has anyone upgraded to the Sierra operating system for Mac? Has anybody upgraded yet? Okay, cool. So we would kindly ask you not to upgrade. Maybe wait till like the end of the course. The reason being, we just don't want. I'd have to look at the documentation, but you know there may be a chance that Sierra would somehow change some of the paths for some of what we've installed on your machine. So like just to alleviate any like wires getting crossed, maybe just hold off on that. And if you want to play around with handlebars, maybe go into that view and create some more handlebars and like, you know, put in 2 + 2 or, you know, some other kind of JavaScript logic and see how it's rendered on the front end, like just to get a sense of what handlebars is doing for you. All right, got 7 thumbs up. Not too shabby. Ooh, got 9. That's awesome. Cool, got 11 thumbs up. Wait for another 1 or 2 more, and then we'll have another you do challenge to get your stuff to loop on your page. All right, we got 12, good enough for me. All right, so the next step, what I want you guys to do, a little bit of a you do, I put in a link to the handlebars documentation that talks about looping over JavaScript objects. So what I want you guys to do, it'll take maybe 10 minutes, and I want you guys to go to that documentation and add some handlebars code that will make your favorite foods render like the screenshot I just put into Slack. So check out that built-in helpers documentation, the handlebars, and play around with that. See if you can read the documentation and get iterate over that array and print it out to the screen. So we'll take a few minutes and hack on that, and then we'll come back and review it. So yeah, I'll give you guys. We'll take maybe 10 minutes for this, and please give me a thumbs up in Slack if you get that working, and then we'll come back and take a look at how we did it. Any questions about that you do? Cool. Sounds good. And then we're on a really good pace to hit lab time, and then we'll put you guys in the breakout rooms and have you work on some more application. Record again. One of you be willing to come on mic and kind of walk us through, maybe the documentation, and then how you implemented that into the Hello Express app? Any volunteers?
Hey, Mark, are you asking for volunteers to demonstrate how you made that happen?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying hitting up Christine here. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind maybe showing us the documentation and kind of how you thought about the documentation to put it into your app. If you wouldn't mind, that'd be great.
Sure.
And by the way, if you look in the lesson itself, I put the solution in there. You should see it in that section. I'll also paste it here into Slack, but if you want to see what the code looks like. Okay, sorry, please proceed.
Sure. I read through the documentation and got to the thing where it was talking about each, and I really basically just copied and pasted this, or I didn't copy and paste it, but I just typed this up exactly the same as they had it in the documentation. And it said each, and then it didn't say data, it said something else. And I figured there was one of two options. Either it was data or it was the variable name favorite foods. I was pretty sure it was data, but I just put favorite foods in there real quick, and that did not work. And I can demonstrate that. So that makes that not display correctly.
So why does it have to be data? Where is that coming from?
It's referencing back again to this right here.
Yep.
Data favorite foods.
Yep.
And then I made that CSS thing. Where did that go to? Yeah, and that was just that.
Oh, you threw that in there? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome, man. So would you mind explaining like lines 3 through maybe 5 there?
Sure.
Yeah.
If I recall correctly, it said each was a built-in function, and that it just loops through it. So it sounds like it's a for loop, basically, just written with 5 characters instead of a bunch more.
Yeah.
And then, so first I wrapped it all in an unordered list, and gave it a class because the documentation gave it a class as well. And so I'm guessing that this is something like, create an unordered list with the class favorite foods, and then loop through the data and put each item in the data inside a li tag, and then end the for loop and close the unordered list.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. It's pretty much just another variety of JavaScript, right? So if you go through the documentation, there's each, which, like you said, Jason, is kind of a for loop for all intents and purposes. Conditional statements if you go through the documentation. But yeah, you pretty much open up the for loop or the each loop. It looks like you need the hashtag each, and then you also need to close it down at the bottom with the / each. And then you pass in the object that you're iterating over. In this case, data is actually our array of favorite foods. And then the this keyword it's kind of, I guess you could consider it maybe like the index or whatever. It's each individual item that you're iterating over, and it's going to create an li element for each one of those. And then it's all wrapped in a UL. Yeah, that class equals favorite foods, that's not really necessary. I mean, that's more CSS if you wanted to create a class, but yeah, that's really nice. And it's very similar to, I mean, it is pretty much JavaScript, right? It's just kind of a different way of writing it for the front end, for HTML. And Jason, if you don't mind, again, would you mind inspecting the element and in your browser? And what should we not see in the browser?
Handlebars.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So again, Node does all the math for us. It compiles the handlebars into valid HTML, and then all the browser sees is HTML code. So if you don't mind inspecting the element, oh, you got it down there, my bad. Yeah, it's just a UL with some LIs. So as far as the browser is concerned, it doesn't know that there's any JavaScript in there. It just sees HTML. Nice work, man. Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Pretty cool.
Why does he have those awesome mustaches on his tabs, and I don't have those mustaches? I need those.
Who, Jason does? I didn't notice that.
Yeah, he had mustaches on his tabs in Atom. It says
That
Atom.
might have been some package I downloaded or something like that for Atom. I don't know.
This is going to be a problem.
Sean's all fired up for Movember. He's already. You're still working on it, right, Sean?
I shaved it off. My wife was like, I don't like it.
Oh man.
I was gotta please the wife.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. So hopefully you guys are seeing like some value in these templating systems, these templating libraries, specifically handlebars, which I think is really fun, and it's easier than most as far as the syntax, right? So you have like 2 curly brackets on each side, and then if you want to go through the documentation, you can pretty much do anything that you can do in JavaScript to an object or an array and have it render in the browser. It's really pretty handy and powerful. I have one more thing to go over before lab time, but are there any questions about that, about looping over an array using handlebars? Any of the templating? All right. Sounds good. So the last thing just wanted to touch on, Jason had already implemented it into his app, but want to walk through how to pull in static assets into your Express app. So if you have external style sheets, if you have external JavaScript libraries, let's take a quick peek at how we can do that. So adding static assets. The first thing we're going to do is in our index.js, I'll share my screen and kind of walk through these steps. So in my index.js, we just need to tell Express where we're putting these static assets. And the convention is to create a folder called public and then put all your static assets in there. So within your public folder, you'll probably want to create like a CSS folder, JavaScript or a scripts folder. If you have external fonts that you want to use, you could create a fonts folder. But we're going to tell Express just to look in that folder for all of this content. So for this one, we're going to use a different method that we haven't seen before. It's called use.use. We're going to take a look at this also tomorrow when we hop into forms. And someone's on mic, if you wouldn't mind muting. This .use is very specific to Express. And when we see this .use method, this is explicitly referring to Express's ability to use it as what's called middleware. So middleware we're going to talk a little bit more about tomorrow, but middleware is pretty much everything that happens between receiving a request and sending back a response. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do in the middle of the request and the response cycle. We haven't really taken a look at that today. We'll hop into that tomorrow. But there's a lot of like kind of middleman action that we can put into our applications. And so .use is one of the methods that we can use to do that. So we'll do app.use, and then we're going to use a method on Express called static, which just lets Express know that we're talking about some static files. And then what this one takes is it takes the dir name, which is, for all intents and purposes, it's a kind of a variable that refers to the main folder, the main directory that our app lives in. In this case, our app lives in this hello-express directory. So it's saying the static files are going to live within that parent directory, specifically the public folder. So we're going to need to create that folder. But that's what this line of code is doing. It's just pointing Express to the right location. So we put that in there. Then I'm going to create a directory, again, kind of in the parent folder called public. So we'll make dir public. Cool. And so now in this public folder, again, CSS files, JavaScript files, fonts, any kind of other public static file information or content we would put in this folder. So to be a little bit more explicit, I'm also going to create a CSS folder just in case I have multiple CSS files. So I'll go ahead and create that. Oops. Let me undo that. Try that one more time. Need to do a make dir there, my bad. There we go. Okay, so in this folder, I'm going to create like a styles.css. styles.css. And so I have that file right here. And just to kick the tires, just to test it out, let me put a background color on body just to test it out. I'll also put like a font family just to mix it up. Get my spelling correct. I'll just make this Georgia. Cool. So we added background red and font family Georgia, and let's test that out. So I'll refresh the browser. And there we go. So we have a red background, and now the font has changed to Georgia. Now, the one step that we didn't walk through, which is super essential, is it's actually because we put it in there earlier. The other key part of this is that we still need to link up that style sheet or JavaScript file in the head of our HTML. In this case, all of that head and kind of HTML scaffolding lives in our layout.hbs. And so we need to make sure that we tell this file where to find those style rules. So take particular note of the path where to find that file. So since here index.js, let me move this down here. So index.js, Express already knows to look in the hello-express directory, then go into the public directory. So we don't need to put that in the path, right? All we need to do is include the information after that path. In this case, we're going to go to /CSS and then grab the styles.css file. So that's how that path works. If you wanted to include a separate JavaScript file, which I'm actually going to encourage you guys to do during lab time to play around with it, you would do it in the same way. You'd want to put a script tag in the head of your HTML and then make sure that that path is correct. Sometimes that's kind of the tricky part is like, why isn't my path working? Once that sinks in, you get into that habit, I think that path will start to make a little bit more sense. But that's how we add static files to our Express applications. So let's take another 1 or 2 minutes and do a quick you-do before lab. And I'd like you guys to add an external style sheet to your app before we hit lab time. So again, add that app.use line of code and create the public directory and such. And give me a thumbs up in Slack when you get that working. Right. Looks like we have 4 thumbs ups. Is anyone having anything blowing up on them? Having any difficulty? Zach? Yeah, you want to share your screen? We'll take a peek.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so we're pretty close there. Let's take a look at your index real quick, index.js. Okay, so on line 7, that looks good. So it looks like you have your app.u set up correctly. So let's go back to your layout.hbs. So can anyone come on mic and tell us what's a little funky about Zach's path there? What can we fix?
Need a / in front of public?
You don't need public
Why don't we need public, Aaron?
because we defined it in the app.use.
Yeah.
We said dir name, which is like the current directory, which is where the app is, which we're in. What are we in? Hello app? What's it called? Hello Express.
Hello Express. Yeah.
And then that's Hello Express plus the subdirectory public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, there you go. Yeah, so remember that we already have like the first part of the path built for us. So all you need to worry about is everything after public. So Express already knows to look in the public folder for your static assets. So you only need to start at like the CSS folder or the JavaScript folder and then go forward. And I found, Zach, if you don't mind sharing your screen one more time, just kind of a good practice that I found is, so there in your href, it's a good practice because sometimes this will blow up. I would put that / before CSS just to be safe. Sometimes I've had instances where it won't find that file, and putting that / to officially complete the path is what fixes it. So it's a good practice just to throw that in there to be very thorough. Very nice. Yeah, man. Looking good. Got 7 thumbs up. Anyone else having an issue? Take a quick peek. All right. Zarella, you want to share your screen?
Yes.
We'll hop into lab time.
Okay, so here it is. Wait, let me get my item. Oops. Okay, so I put a pink background, and then I added that line that we needed to have. And then that layout, I have that. When I created the file, the whole thing, but.
Can someone help Zarella out? What is her issue?
Is that it? Wait.
There you go.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Stop sharing.
That's another tricky one. Yeah.
Yeah, it has happened.
Yeah. Very nice. All right. So how are you guys feeling about handlebars? I mean, we covered a lot of ground today. I mean, we spun up Express. You guys are, we got to throw on some authentication in a database, but in broad strokes, I mean, we're doing like some dipping our toe into the full stack waters, which is pretty exciting. But like a fist to 5, how are you guys feeling about Express and handlebars, what we've covered today so far? Okay, I see some 4s. That's great, man. A lot of this, again, is just repetition because you're going to go through these same steps and such to spin up your Express apps. So in that spirit, let me put the lab time into Slack. So for lab time, kind of the gist is that I would like you guys, I'm going to put you into pairs and breakout rooms. You pretty much just walk through what we did today, starting this morning. So you can use this morning's lesson and this afternoon's lesson for reference. But I just want you guys to go back through and try to create another app pretty much the way that we did it today. So for this example, I want you guys to create an app about your favorite TV shows. You can do another resource or another topic if you want. But I gave you a little bit, I gave you like 10 kind of, steps just to kind of like move you forward. And I'll let you guys read those. But it's pretty much the progress that we went throughout the day to get to where we are right now with our app. I'm going to commit and push my version of the code right now to the instructor examples folder. And I'll send you that link. So if you need any, kind of reference material, you'll have that available. But see if you can get through these 10 steps. And then as a stretch, try adding a JavaScript file to the app. So we already added a style sheet. Adding a JavaScript file is not too much different from that. And if you get through all 10 of those steps and the stretch, just start over, practice it again, and create another app with like movies or songs or artists or comments or recipes or whatever you want. But we just want to try to get some drills down, and hopefully this stuff will start to sink in like muscle memory. So any questions about lab time? So we'll reconvene, talk to the other instructors. We'll have stand-ups after lab time. I'm available, so just ping me if you need any assistance. Yeah, and like Christine mentioned, go ahead and create the today's lab in the student labs folder. Feel free to do that. All right, well, have a good lab. We'll see you guys in around 5:30-ish.